For most of its history, the continental United States lived with a quiet confidence that no enemy would ever dare set foot on its shores. The nation was vast, fortified by oceans, protected by distance, and anchored by the belief that war happened somewhere else across the Atlantic, across the Pacific, anywhere but here. Even in 1943, with the world engulfed in conflict and battles exploding across Europe and the Pacific, Americans still believed the homeland stood beyond the reach of true danger. But confidence is fragile, and sometimes one moment is all it takes to shatter it. What happened on a cold March morning along the northeastern coast would become one of those moments buried by the government, erased from official reports, but preserved in the memory of a single man few ever noticed. His name was Private First Class Michael Thompson, an unassuming young soldier from Pennsylvania, known for nothing remarkable except for being quiet. He had grown up in a steel town where the routine was predictable and life rarely offered surprises. Teachers described him as distant, the type who lived more in his thoughts than in conversations. Even when he enlisted at 19, no one believed he would do anything extraordinary. He wasn't strong enough to be a standout infantryman, not quick enough for special operations, not rebellious enough to draw attention. The army gave him a radio, a uniform, and a coastal observation assignment, one of dozens spread along the East Coast, considered more symbolic than essential. After all, who would dare attack the United States? That question found its answer on a morning that began in silence. Michael had the dawn shift in a small observation bunker built into a rocky cliff. The fog that day was so thick that the ocean appeared as a single sheet of gray metal stretching into oblivion. The wind was unnervingly still. Even the gulls were absent. That was when he heard it. A low, pulsing vibration came through the long-range receiver so faint that most people wouldn't have noticed it, but Michael felt it more than heard it. He leaned closer, adjusted the dial, and the pulse sharpened. It wasn't static. It wasn't natural ocean noise. It was deliberate, rhythmic. Wrong. He went to his supervising sergeant, Miller, a man who had never once taken his observations seriously. Michael explained that the frequency was repeating in intervals too precise to be natural, but Miller waved him away with irritation, insisting he was overthinking harmless interference. Yet the pulse grew stronger. Then it shifted. It broke into a pattern, syncopated, mechanical, coded. Michael returned to Miller, insisting something unusual was happening offshore, but once again the sergeant dismissed him. Michael had spent his entire life being ignored, so he returned to the console quietly, but his eyes stayed locked on the frequency. Minutes later, the ground trembled just enough to make the lights flicker. Miller finally took interest, stepping forward with a straightened posture. Then the fog outside moved, not drifted, but moved as if pushed aside by something enormous rising from beneath the ocean. Cups rattled on the bunker's metal tables. Dust fell from the ceiling, and then both men heard a deep, metallic groan cut through the radio headset. They rushed outside. What rose from the water was not a submarine, not a ship, not anything built by any nation known to the US military. A massive structure surfaced through the fog, its hull jagged and uneven, its form almost organic in its ugliness. Smoke leaked from vents along its sides. The ocean around it churned violently. Then several smaller objects detached from beneath the surface and shot downward. Submersible machines, but too advanced, too coordinated, too precise to match any known enemy technology of 1943. The sergeant stared, unable to move. Michael grabbed the radio to call command, but the line was dead. Not static, dead, as if the air itself no longer carried signals. "They're jamming us," Michael said before he even realized he had spoken. Miller turned sharply toward him, startled, but the quiet private understood what seasoned officers had never taught him. The ground trembled again, sand shifted, rocks vibrated. The ocean began to bubble in patterns that looked disturbingly intentional. Something beneath the waves was approaching the shore. Michael knelt and placed his hand on the ground. He felt the vibration as clearly as if it were a heartbeat. "They're calibrating," he whispered. "Calibrating what?" Miller demanded. Michael didn't know, but he knew they had to act. He sprinted back into the bunker and ripped open the auxiliary panel beneath the long-range receiver. Inside was a secondary signal coil installed years earlier but never used. Michael bypassed 2 wires, flipped the inversion circuit, and blasted a counter-frequency straight into the ocean. The bunker shook violently. Outside, the fog rippled outward. Sparks exploded across the hull of the strange vessel. The submersible machines beneath the water spun erratically and lost formation. The pulse stopped. So did the vibration. The invasion, whatever form it was supposed to take, had been interrupted. For the first time since that morning started, the monstrous vessel hesitated. Miller looked at Michael with disbelief. For years, no one had taken him seriously. Now, in a matter of seconds, he had become the only man standing between the United States and an enemy no one could identify. And this was only the beginning. Because when Michael thought the danger had passed, the ocean erupted again, louder, deeper, angrier, and that was the moment he realized the truth that would define everything that happened next. He had not stopped the invasion, he had only delayed it, and now something far worse was coming for them. The ocean did not calm after the counter-frequency pulse. Instead, it reacted as if wounded. The surface churned violently, and the fog that had been slowly lifting collapsed again into a thick wall, swallowing the horizon in seconds. Michael felt the ground beneath him vibrate with a deeper, heavier rhythm, like the slow awakening of something ancient and mechanical beneath the sea. Sergeant Miller shouted orders to secure equipment, but the truth was clear. No one knew what to prepare for. The entire bunker shivered as another tremor surged across the coastline, stronger than before, and the long-range receiver flickered back to life just long enough to spit out a fragment of sound that made Michael's blood run cold, a frequency rising in pitch like a scream dragged across the ocean floor. The vessel offshore responded. It shifted, its massive hull tilting to one side before correcting itself with a grinding groan that echoed across the cliffs. Bright flashes burst along its surface as internal systems rebooted or malfunctioned. Michael couldn't tell which. Then the water directly in front of the shoreline erupted upward as a metallic shape forced its way to the surface. It was one of the underwater machines, a submersible module, but larger than the others they had glimpsed. It rose like a breaching whale, spinning erratically, leaking plumes of steam and smoke. Its outer plating cracked open as it jerked left and right, clearly damaged by Michael's frequency. But even crippled, it was terrifying. The machine towered above the waves for several seconds before slamming down into the water again, sending a blast of spray that hammered against the cliffside. Michael gripped the railing outside the bunker to keep from falling. Miller cursed under his breath as soldiers scrambled to alert nearby posts. The phones, radios, and emergency transmitters remained dead. They were cut off from the entire coast. Michael scanned the fog toward the vessel, watching as its lights flickered like the breath of a beast struggling to stand. It was reacting, learning, adjusting, and the realization hit him with a weight that almost stole his breath. The counter-frequency he had used hadn't simply disrupted the machine. It had forced the vessel to alter its approach. He had interfered with a system far more advanced than anything the U.S. military possessed, and now that system was recalibrating to overcome him. He ran back inside the bunker as another tremor rattled the windows. Miller followed, demanding answers. "Thompson, what the hell did you do to that thing?" Michael didn't hesitate. "I interrupted its coordination with whatever is underwater," he said, wiring the receiver back into the improvised configuration he had created earlier. "But they're adjusting. They're not just attacking, they're adapting to counterattack." Miller stared at him like he was hearing a foreign language. "Who's they?" Michael froze for a moment, unsure how to answer. The truth was that he didn't know, but the pulse, the machines, the jamming, none of it matched any Axis power. None of it matched human capabilities from any nation in 1943. "I don't know," Michael whispered, "but they're not leaving until they finish what they started." The bunker shook again as the submersible module moved closer. Soldiers outside began firing at it, bullets pinging uselessly off its armored hull. The machine didn't even react. It simply rose higher, its cracked shell beginning to unfold like segments of an insect. Inside, dark cables and mechanical limbs twitched violently. Michael's instincts screamed that this was not a weapon meant to attack directly. It was meant to anchor, to attach itself to land, to open the way. "They're trying to deploy a landing system," Michael said, his voice tight. "If that thing secures itself to the shoreline, we're done." Miller swallowed hard, understanding the implications. The fog thickened as the module emitted a high-pitched pulse that rattled every bone in Michael's body. It was a call, a signal, a command to the vessel offshore. And the vessel answered. A low rumble rolled across the water as the massive structure began rotating, slowly but deliberately. Panels along its side opened and closed like gills. It was preparing for something larger than a single module. Something coordinated, something irreversible. Michael saw only one option left. He turned to the frequency inverter and began adjusting dials with frantic precision. Miller stepped forward. "What are you doing?" "Stopping it," Michael said, "or trying to." He tuned the inverter to mirror the pulse the module was sending, but inverted it by a fractional delay. The timing had to be perfect. One mistake and he could amplify the module instead of disrupting it. His hands shook, but his focus didn't waver. A childhood spent tinkering with broken radios suddenly felt like training for this exact moment. The bunker's lights flickered again as he fed power into the coil. He felt the heat rising from the overloaded circuit. One more adjustment, one more breath, and then he flipped the switch. The pulse fired. A wave of invisible force rippled across the water. The module screamed a metallic shriek that vibrated through the bunker walls. Its plates convulsed, twisting inward, sparks shooting from its exposed joints. Then its stabilizing legs buckled, and the machine lurched sideways, slamming into the shoreline with enough force to crack the rocks beneath it. Miller grabbed Michael and pulled him back as shards of metal flew past the bunker entrance. The machine spasmed one final time and then collapsed into the surf, half submerged, smoke rising from its ruined core. For a brief moment, the entire coast fell silent. Michael exhaled shakily, but he didn't feel relief. The worst was still coming, because the vessel offshore did not react with confusion or retreat. It reacted with understanding and anger. The deep rumble that followed was unlike anything Michael had ever heard, a vibration so powerful that it made the air seem to shake apart. The fog began to swirl, pulled inward toward the vessel as if the ocean itself were being drawn into a vortex. Lights flickered rapidly along the vessel's hull, forming patterns too fast for the human eye to follow. "It's recalibrating again," Michael said, his voice trembling for the first time. "It's learning faster now." "What do we do?" Miller asked. Michael stared at the receiver, then back at the vessel. "We stopped the whole system, not the modules, not the signals. The core," Hal Miller demanded. "We can't even reach command." "We don't need command," Michael said, stepping toward the console. "We need resonance." He adjusted the inverter again, but this time he didn't aim for the module. He aimed for the frequency the vessel itself was emitting, the same deep pulse that had first awakened his suspicion, the same rhythm that underlay the entire operation. He amplified the signal he had recorded earlier and searched for a harmonic counterpoint. The moment he found it, he felt it like two puzzle pieces snapping together. A perfect inversion, a perfect disruption. He fed power into the coil again. Sparks shot from the wires, the bunker filled with the smell of overheating circuits. Miller shielded his face as the lights flickered violently. "Michael, the equipment can take this much. It's not the equipment that matters," Michael said through gritted teeth. "It's the timing." Outside, the vessel's rumbling intensified. The fog around it spiraled faster. Waves crashed against the rocks with increasing violence. The ocean itself seemed afraid. "Now," Michael whispered, and he fired the pulse. For a moment, the world froze. The water stilled. The wind died. Even the fog stopped moving. Then the ocean erupted in a roar of defiance. The vessel shook violently as if struck by an unseen force. Its lights flickered, dimmed, then burst in cascades of sparks. Panels tore free from its hull. The massive structure tilted backward, scraping against the water with a groan that echoed like thunder. Miller grabbed Michael as the bunker trembled, but Michael refused to look away. The vessel began to retreat, slowly at first, then faster, then with unmistakable urgency. The rumble faded, the fog thinned, the ocean calmed, and then it was gone, swallowed once more by the horizon. The retreat of the vessel did not bring relief. It brought a deeper, heavier silence that settled over the coast like a weight no one could lift. The ocean, moments ago a battlefield of noise and chaos, now looked disturbingly calm, almost deliberate in its stillness. The fog lingered in uneven wisps across the water, as if unwilling to fully depart, as though it too sensed the unfinished business beneath the surface. Michael stood at the bunker entrance, his uniform soaked with sweat despite the cold air. Sergeant Miller paced behind him, unable to hide the tremor in his hands. The soldiers nearby exchanged glances filled not with triumph, but with confusion and dread. They had not won anything, they had survived something they did not understand. And surviving the unknown does not bring courage, it brings questions and fear. Miller finally broke the silence. "What now?" Michael didn't answer at first. He stared at the horizon where the vessel had vanished, replaying every vibration, every frequency shift, every unnatural pulse. His mind felt like a radio caught between stations, fragments of understanding, fragments of dread, none of them forming a complete picture. "It's not over," Michael said at last. "They retreated because they were destabilized, not defeated." Miller swallowed. "Why pull back at all?" "They had the advantage because they needed precision." Michael replied. "Whatever they were trying to do, it depended on perfect coordination, and I broke it." "So they'll come back?" Miller asked. Michael nodded. "And next time, they won't underestimate us." Miller exhaled slowly. "We need to alert command. They won't ignore us after this." But when he turned to the radio equipment, his face froze. The entire system was fried. The inversion pulse Michael had fired had overloaded every transmitter, every coil, every circuit. The bunker sat isolated, technologically stranded. "Can you fix it?" Miller asked. Michael shook his head. "It wasn't just the pulse, they're jamming. It doesn't just block signals, it corrupts them." Miller cursed under his breath. "So we can't call anyone, not electronically, then how?" Michael didn't answer because he didn't know, not yet. Another tremor rolled across the cliffs, one faint, distant, but enough to make every soldier shift uneasily. The ocean rippled again, small waves forming patterns that didn't match the wind. Something was happening beneath the water. Something still moving, still deciding, still listening. Miller forced himself to regain composure. "We need eyes on the shoreline." The fog drifted, but visibility remained too limited. The quiet wasn't comforting, it was oppressive. A silence too intentional to trust. After several minutes they spotted movement, not onshore at the base of the cliffs. But it wasn't still. It twitched, pulsed. The shattered remnants of the machine were reactivating. "It's not dead," Miller whispered. "It's repairing," Michael corrected, "or recalibrating to a new function." What function? I don't know, but the machine's movements grew more coordinated, and its lights flickered back to life, dim at first, then brighter. It was trying to complete its mission, whatever that mission was. Michael hurried back into the bunker and approached the ruined communications console. He touched the metal casing and felt a faint vibration different from before. It wasn't a pulse from the ocean. It was an echo. It was still building its frequency, still calibrating. That meant he had a window, a small one, to disrupt it. But the inverter coil was burned out. The backup transmitter was fused. Everything he had used earlier was now dead. Except Michael's eyes drifted to the long-range listening device mounted near the bunker's ceiling. It wasn't meant for broadcasting signals. It was meant for absorbing them. But its amplification coil, the one responsible for enhancing faint frequencies from distant waves, could be repurposed if he reversed the polarity and fed a manual current into it. I can overload the beacon, Michael said quietly. If I feed enough unstable resonance into its frequency band before it completes calibration, I can cause a feedback collapse. Miller frowned in English. I can break it permanently. Miller nodded and motioned for two soldiers to bring down the heavy listening array. Michael opened the panel beneath it and exposed the coil. The insulation was worn, and the thing hummed with unpredictable power, but it was functional. Barely. He stripped wires with a combat knife, rerouted the current through a makeshift circuit he constructed with scraps from the destroyed transmitter, and connected it to the array. Sparks flew. The room smelled of ozone. This could kill you, Miller said. If it doesn't work, Michael replied, we'll all have bigger problems. He positioned the array to face the wreckage outside and adjusted the gain until he found the beacon's building frequency low, pulsing, incomplete. He needed a perfect inversion again. The timing had to be exact. He waited. The pulse repeated. He waited again. The pulse repeated. Then it shifted upwards slightly, a sign the beacon was nearing activation. Michael braced himself. Now, he whispered, and he fired the counter-frequency. The array screamed as the coil overloaded, blasting a wave of unstable resonance toward the wreckage. The ground shook violently, louder and deeper than before. The beacon emitted a high-pitched shriek that rattled every window in the bunker. Then the wreckage exploded, not outward, but inward, as if collapsing under its own weight. Metal plates folded like paper, lights flickered out permanently. The machine convulsed once and then went still. A crater of crushed steel remained. Michael stumbled backward, breathing hard. The bunker went silent again, but this time it was a different silence, a relieved one, a temporary victory. Miller clapped him on the shoulder. Thompson, you might have just saved the entire eastern seaboard. But Michael shook his head. No, I delayed them again. But they're still out there, and now they know exactly how I'm fighting them. As if on cue, the fog offshore began to glow faintly, not with fire, but with something more precise, more coordinated. The vessel had returned, and it was brighter than before, stronger, smarter. The ocean vibrated under their feet. The cliffside trembled, and Michael realized something that made his stomach drop. The vessel wasn't approaching the coast this time. It was aligning itself with a deeper point offshore, preparing for a larger deployment, a full-scale invasion attempt. And this time, there would be no damaged module, no calibration errors, and no second chances. Miller grabbed his arm. Thompson, what do we do now? Michael looked at the water, at the vessel gathering its strength, and felt something awaken inside him, not fear, not panic, but clarity. We end it, he said. We end the whole system, the vessel, the signal, everything. How? Miller asked. You can't disrupt something that big, not by disrupting it, Michael said. By overloading it. The realization hit him like lightning. He didn't need to invert one signal. He needed to amplify all of them. Simultaneously, a harmonic overload, a frequency storm, one that would turn the vessel's own communication web against itself. It was impossible. It was insane. It was their only chance. And Michael was the only man who had heard enough, learned enough, and survived enough to even attempt it. He stepped back into the bunker, ready to build something no soldier in 1943 had ever imagined. Because the only way to stop an invasion no one believed in was to fight it with a mind no one believed in either. The bunker felt smaller now, as if the walls themselves sensed the enormity of what was coming. The air buzzed with the low hum of unstable electricity. The remnants of Michael's previous improvisations still clinging to the equipment like ghosts refusing to leave. Michael worked quickly, stripping wires, repositioning coils, rerouting energy sources that were never meant to be used in this capacity. Every piece of equipment he touched radiated heat, as if warning him that the boundary between function and destruction had nearly disappeared. He felt the tension build behind him, Miller watching, soldiers whispering, the entire bunker holding its breath. "Thompson," Miller said finally, his voice low, "tell me what you're doing." Michael didn't look up. "If I amplify everything they're sending, every pulse, every calibration tone, every signal transmission and reflect it back with enough force, their entire system could collapse. Or ours could," Miller countered. "This equipment wasn't built for this. Neither was I," Michael said quietly. "But here we are." Miller didn't argue. He stepped aside, letting Michael continue. The floor trembled again as the vessel aligned into position, the glow intensifying until the fog looked lit from within. Michael tightened a final connection and felt the charge rush through the wires, humming with raw potential. One wrong move and everything in the room could explode. But the choice was simple: risk everything or lose everything. He repositioned the listening array, now rewired to serve as a directional amplifier, and tuned the frequency detectors to synchronize with the vessel's signals. The display flickered, showing overlapping patterns, complex, interwoven, far too advanced to be random. But beneath the complexity, Michael saw it, the heartbeat of the system, a repeating pulse, subtle yet constant. The core frequency linking all the signals, the vessel's lifeline. "I found it," he whispered. Miller leaned forward. "Found what?" Their spine outside. The fog swirled violently, pulled toward the vessel as waves crashed over the shoreline. The water rose unnaturally high, as if drawn into the hull's magnetic pull. Something large moved beneath the surface, casting shadows that looked impossibly long. They weren't dealing with one machine anymore. They were dealing with an entire network. For a moment, it almost succeeded. The glow steadied, the hull hummed in resistance, but then the pattern fractured. Fire erupted along its side in cascading bursts. The modules below the surface detonated one by one, sending plumes of boiling water into the air. The tremors weakened, the fog thinned, the water calmed, and the silence that followed felt different from the others, not ominous, not heavy, but hollow, empty. The invaders had been forced back, not by cannons, not by fleets, not by generals, but by a quiet soldier no one believed in. Hours passed before communication lines were restored and military command arrived. They found the bunker half destroyed, equipment melted, wires fused, and Michael exhausted, burned, but alive. Reports were taken. Questions were asked. Explanations were demanded, but none of the officers could fully grasp what had happened, because the language of frequencies, pulses, and resonance was not something they were trained to understand. They saw only the aftermath, the wreckage, the retreat, the anomaly, and Michael, who for the first time stood taller than he ever had, not in ego, but in certainty. The world would never know his name. The reports would be classified. The incident would be buried under layers of secrecy. The vessel would be labeled a mechanical anomaly, the tremors seismic events, and the entire coastal engagement dismissed as a false alarm. But the soldiers who stood with him that morning, the ones who saw what the official reports would never acknowledge, never forgot. They knew the truth, that an invasion had begun. But sometimes, late at night, when the world was quiet and the coastline still, he would swear he could feel it, the faintest vibration rising through the ground. And knowing, with chilling certainty, that one day it would return.